Item order of agenda. Motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Order of agenda is approved. We'll begin with the management report. Bruce?
I'll just talk. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Going to go over December and January highlights from start with the technical, since we didn't have a formal January meeting, reaching back into December a little bit. On the bridge work, just continuing work on County Road 20. It's the only one remaining that we're still working on. The majority of the work was on Oxbow, Hicks, and Baki levee design. We're at 35%, which is the Corps' portion, work package 43B, up to 65% for work package 43A, which Houston Moore Group is doing, and that's the section that'll bid out this spring. The VE study was completed a couple of weeks ago. We're also getting ready to submit the 404 permit to the Corps for that project. In-town levies, we're continued working on that, primarily coordinating with the new City Hall project. Not really a December or January highlight, but this week the VE for value engineering for that project was done, and it was completed today. And continuing to work with the Corps on hydrology work and other work in kind. Other activities, the construction MOU was submitted by the Corps to the local sponsors for approval, and Eric Johnson will be going over that for your action today in this meeting, and then it will go on to City of Fargo and City of Moorhead for their approvals. Word of bill is still in conference committee. That's still just moving along at the pace of Congress, so I can't say any more than that. We did have a visit from General DeLuca to visit the project area, and I think a lot of you were involved in that. I think it was a very successful visit. Minnesota EIS completed the DNR contracting after the vote in January to extend them some contracting money. And then we've continued to work on land acquisition activities and policies. February areas that we're working on, still working on WERDA, Oxbow, Hicks, and Baki levee designs moving forward, as well as the in-town levies. The Minnesota DNR, their scoping decision document will be published on Tuesday of next week, and that will start the 280-day clock that they have by Minnesota statute to complete the EIS, and the kickoff meeting is scheduled for Wednesday or Thursday, Bob? Thursday next week, so that's just a couple of days after the publication of the report, so it's getting off to a quick start. With that, I'll turn it over to Terry for her report.
By the way, we thank Fargo for the extra screen there, so people don't have to turn around.
We'll quickly go over the monthly update, a little bit more on the Richland-Wilkin JPA proposal, Maple River physical model update, and path forward. As Bruce said, I think the highlight of the last month for us was participating in the value engineering studies for the Oxbow, Hicks, and Baki ring levee and in-town levee projects. The in-town levee VE just wrapped up today, so there will be a draft report coming out on that with some recommendations for incorporation into that project. We discussed this a little bit when General DeLuca was here a couple weeks ago. It addresses the Richland Wilkin JPA's proposal to have an alignment north of the Wild Rice River. Again, we did study something like that about in October of 12 and did not select it because it impacted about 200 more residences and cost about $53 million more than the alignment we did select. It's important to note that a ring levee would still be required at Oxbow with the north of the Wild Rice alignment. Their current system does not meet certifiable protection levels as under FEMA rules. Their system allows them to better flood fight a 2009-like event. And in conclusion, our plan is our plan, our alignment is our alignment. Again, this is the same map that was shown a couple weeks ago. It shows the alignments we did look at over a year ago. The selected alignment was the VE13A alignment in red. The north of the Wild Rice alignment is in purple, and it's a few miles north.
Did you share that with the coalition? Did they come by, or is it just you telling us?
I'm telling you, yeah.
So they
We're
can
just
get it from
telling
this
you.
meeting, is that right? Or they're welcome to talk to engineers if they need to, or?
An update on the Maple River physical model. Water was recently added to the model, and they're putting the finishing touches on the model before they start making actual runs. Just for scale, this is a Lego toy, a Lego man right here, and he is about 6 feet tall. So that just gives you a little bit of scale when looking at this at the aqueduct structure. That was recently added about 2 weeks ago into the actual model is the metal aqueduct structure.
You couldn't put an engineer in there to give us a better idea?
The next Lego man will be an engineer. This one's a hockey player. Thanks to April. April gave me that. So path forward, as Bruce said, the construction MOU is awaiting signature by the sponsors. And the colonel will sign it once the Diversion Authority and the City of Moorhead and City of Fargo are done. Like Bruce said, we're awaiting federal authorization, hoping any week now. We'll continue to review designs. We'll continue to help out with the Minnesota EIS and continue the Oxbow-Hixson-Bocke levee design. That ends my briefing. Any questions?
Any questions for Terry? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Next, Eric, items A and B. Maybe I'll let Eric explain the bylaws and the election of chair and vice chair.
Certainly, yes. Thank you. Good afternoon. At the time we formed the Joint Powers entity for the diversion project, we also approved bylaws, and Article 6 of the bylaws makes reference to periodic elections of the officers. There are, I think, 4 officers, actually. There's the chair, the vice chair, a secretary, and a treasurer. Of course, the secretary and treasurer are those officers' roles are handled by sort of staff-level people. But the chair and vice chair are elected. And as the bylaws say, at the first regular meeting of the Diversion Authority Board, and at the first meeting of the Diversion Authority Board held each calendar year, the board shall elect the chair and vice chair. Well, it actually says the officers, the chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer. And so I think it would be appropriate to suggest that somehow, I don't know how you want to handle the election and nomination process, but
Sure.
you select the chair and vice chair, and at the same time continue with I assume the secretary and treasurer.
I open it up to the board members. In terms
Mr.
of,
Chair, I would like to nominate Darrell Vanu as chair.
Second.
motion and second. Any others?
We like you working hard.
All in, there's No others. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Mr. Chair, I'd also like to nominate Mr. Mahoney as vice chair.
Motion and a second. Any other nominations? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you for your
Did we both
voting
abstain from our votes?
confidence. Go ahead, Eric.
Very good. Yeah, the next item for me is the memorandum of understanding between the Corps and the sponsors. And of course, now the sponsors are the cities of Fargo, the city of Moorhead, and the Diversion Authority. This, in your packet, is that form of agreement that's been sort of pre-approved by the Corps. And we're looking for your approval, and this would also go before the City Commission. We've got it on the agenda for Tuesday evening, and I think it'll come before the City of Moorhead Council. I think it's February 24th is their meeting. And then once it's been approved by the three sponsors, then return to the Corps. This is the memorandum of understanding. Of course, we've had design agreements. After authorization, we'll have a project participation agreement. This just allows certain construction to go forward in advance of the PPA, specifically the in-town levies and the Oxbow levy project.
Any
Mr. Chair,
questions, Kevin?
This is basically a continuation of what we've had before, isn't it?
I think we have had discussions about this in, I believe, November and possibly December as
Yeah.
well, if that's what you mean. We were looking at drafts at that
But I
time.
think, Kevin, you're asking, this is what we requested to be done, right?
Yeah.
And we'd wanted this done so we could proceed with construction even
Yeah.
if feds didn't put money in.
Other questions?
So is this the suggestion for this board to approve this tonight as one of the three entities? Is that what we want?
Correct,
Yeah.
yes.
I would so move. Enter into the MOU.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Further comments or questions? Nancy?
At this point, we're not approving any certain amount of dollars or anything like that. This is a memorandum of understanding to work with the Corps at this time.
Right. I think the design agreement has addressed the funding side of it, and this is just authorization for the work and how the work will be performed.
Good question. Any others? If not, we'll take the roll.
Mr. Benyo?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Wallaker?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Yes.
Mr. Wimmer?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Ms. Otto?
Yes.
Thank you.
Think that-
Eric?
Thank you.
Bruce is going to cover a number of task orders here. You have them in your packet. He's going to kind of briefly explain them. And then unless somebody wants to pull one down individually, I would entertain a motion to approve all of them. So, but you have freedom to pull any one down or ask questions about any of them. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay. I'll go through these. There are amendments to 4 task orders, and then we have a new authority, or 5 task orders and a new authority work directive. So Amendment 1 is the management task order, and what we're doing is funding that through the end of fiscal year 2014, so through the end of September. We did some budget adjustments within that task order on some of the sub-budgets were being used at a greater rate, some were less, so did an overall adjustment, but primarily it's the increase in the public involvement assistance, which was increasing the amount of that task order. Land management services is a no-cost task change, but we are changing the scope in that. One of the things we're doing there is the right of entry work that had been done under the Diversion Authority task order. We're moving the North Dakota right of entry work under the Cass County Joint Water Resources District contract and task order similar to the acquisition of the lands in North Dakota. Right of entries under Minnesota would stay under the Diversion Authority. So we're changing the scope of that task order. The next is on increase in the work in kind for task order number 8, and that's primarily for the Minnesota EIS support. Houston Moore Group is going to be doing the socioeconomic model for that, so it's primarily the amount in there. And just to let you know that the increase for the socioeconomic modeling is about $250,000, but we've reduced scope and budget and some other items about $120,000 for a net of approximately $130,000 increase in this task order. The utilities design, task order number 10, we're adding scope for sanitary sewer relocation design as part of the Oxbow, Hicks, and Bakke, but there is budget within that task order to do it. So again, it's a no change, but it is a change in scope. The last is a work directive. We don't have the scope and fee finally negotiated for this one, so but we do, for schedule reasons, need to get started on geotech and other early activities. This is 4th Street levee stormwater pump station needs to be replaced as part of the certification of the 4th Street levee, which is required for the increased flows through town. So it's a project-related expense. That's a construction project we'd like to start this summer, so we'd like to get started on the geotech. Next month, we'd be bringing back the full task order with the scope and fee, but wanted to authorize some work so that we didn't lose a month of schedule. And with that, I'll answer any questions, or Chair asked to entertain a motion for the
Any questions?
package.
Kevin?
Mr. Chairman, going back to task order number 8, that 130,000, is that still part of the new 1.2 number, 1.2 million number that we killed?
This is not part of the amount that was approved to go to DNR. When we approved the amount, or when the board approved the amount to go to the DNR, that's funding for the DNR. There are certain activities that the local sponsor has to do in addition to the cost of the DNR, and this is part of that. When we split scope of work with the Minnesota DNR, it was agreed local sponsor would do the socioeconomic, and
So this wasn't a big surprise.
it was not. We knew negotiating that it was going to come in, and it's a little bit different than the socioeconomic evaluation that the Corps did, because they work under different rules. So some of the things are very adaptable from the federal EIS to the DNR EIS, but socioeconomic was not one that translated very easily from the federal to the state. I don't know, Bob, if you want to jump in, you're nodding your head. So
I think you've done good, Bruce.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Bob, are you nodding your head because you want to fund that, or?
I don't think so.
So we have the 4 task orders and the work directive before us.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion, any second? Any other questions, comments? Not, take the roll.
Mr. Benyo?
Yes?
Mr. Bennett? Yes. Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Wallaker?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Yes.
Mr. Wimmer?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Ms. Otto?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Bruce, do you want to speak to this utilities relocation?
Oh, yes. Well,
It's item 6B.
as part of the Corps' process and part of the project, as we construct the diversion channel, we're going to be impacting a number of utilities, both overhead and underground utilities. So those have to be moved. Prior to starting that work and working with those utilities, we identify all those and submit that to the Corps for a ruling on the compensability as to whether the relocation of those utilities is compensable under Corps rules or not. And what the Corps, broad guidelines, and it goes through the Corps' legal, so if I step out of line, Terry, jump in. But if the utility has essentially a land right or a real estate right, they have an actual easement, they own the land, it's compensable under Corps rules. If it's in a public right-of-way, it's generally not compensable under Corps rules. So the Corps would say the local sponsor is not obligated to pay that utility, and you will not get credit if you do pay the utility. At the staff level, we feel like if we're, as the Diversion Authority, going to be asking utilities that are in either a county right-of-way or a state right-of-way to move their utility because of the diversion, that the Diversion Authority should compensate the utility for that relocation, regardless or not whether the Corps credits it. So it becomes a crediting issue, but we believe if our project's causing a utility to incur expense, that the staff recommendation would be that that the Diversion Authority compensate them for that relocation. So the decision paper outlines the utility relocation compensation policy, basically saying that whether it's compensable under the Corps rules or non-compensable under the Corps rules, the Diversion Authority will compensate the utilities owners for that. And this has already come up with test rural water users. The majority of their utilities are compensable, but there's a couple small minor utilities that aren't, and they had raised the question after discussions with the Corps that they wouldn't be compensated. So they brought the question, which is what made us come up with this policy and bring it before the board for consideration.
There's, as you can see in the materials, there's 7 utility owners that have been identified.
And those are 7 in reaches 1 through 7 as we work our way. We have another one that we're currently doing for Oxbow, Hicks, and Baki, and then we'll also do one from the Maple or 94 south to that area. So it'll be more than just these utilities, but already we are impacting 7 utilities. Yeah.
Okay. Mark?
Bruce, I can understand us having to do this for the diversion channel, which is a massive and unexpected facility, but like when we build flood walls, if they don't have the rights there, we've required them to move. I'm just wondering if this shouldn't be separated from in-town levies to the actual diversion.
It could be these, as Chair pointed out, that right now the 7 we have asked for from the Corps, whether it's compensable or not, are on reaches 1 through 7, which are the diversion. We haven't brought anything for in-town levies for them, and if
I was assuming you were making policy here.
yeah, and the policy as written now would be overarching for any facility. So if we did want to separate between Diversion Authority and in-town levies, that would be an adjustment we would have to make to the policy. Right now, it's comprehensive for the entire diversion authority.
Bruce, I'm wondering, the way that the motion reads here, we're approving a policy to compensate. Have we even sat down with any of these utility owners to talk about working through this and something other than we're just willing to write out checks for any and all. I mean, it may end up that way, I suppose, but, I mean, I have no idea what all of these may ultimately cost us.
Of the ones in the initial list, the vast majority are compensable under core guidelines already. But as you get in town where they might be along Second Street in the public right-of-way, I don't know, Mark or April or Jason might know more on whether there are easements for those utilities or whether they're just under a permit with the
Well,
city.
our normal policy within the city would be as if they're not on their own easement, they're required to relocate.
For a city project.
For a city project, and I think that this, in-town levies is a pretty straightforward construction, and I don't believe it's out of the ordinary like building a 1,200-foot wide diversion ditch. That's a little bit unexpected.
We could, wanted to now just have a motion for this reaches 1 through 7 instead of policy, or could direct us, we'll go back and work up one that separates out diversion from other types of construction.
Bruce, just a question, it talks about compensating them, just tell how we compensate them, because to Darrell Vanya's question is if they're increasing customer base or increasing volume of work or stuff they're getting out of it, I mean, is there any negotiations that way, or all you're saying is the Corps does have to compensate, but we don't know what the rate is?
It would be a like-for-like type replacement. If they wanted to upgrade as part of that replacement, that would be a betterment. And let's say you're replacing a 2-inch water line, they want to go back and with a 4-inch water line. When they ran it, we would pay for the 2-inch, and they would pay for the betterment between the 2 and the 4. So we would have that level of negotiation with them when we went. It's not clearly stated, but that would be our intent.
So, if I understand this correctly, as in reaches 1 through 7, as these come up, the Corps of Engineers makes a determination, right, as to whether or not they're compensable. And if they don't, then with this policy being approved, we then step in as an authority to determine what our obligation may be. Is that correct?
Yes. If the court determines that it is compensable, then
Yeah.
as part of the project guidelines, we have to compensate.
Nancy?
I'm wondering at this point in time if, rather than just stating an out-and-out policy to compensate, if we should approve authorization to negotiate with utility owners. And then it would need to come back to us for the amounts, with those negotiated amounts. Would that be a better step to take at this point, to authorize negotiation?
It makes sense to me. Corps determines what they're going to determine, and this is no different. And this doesn't affect them. This motion does not affect them. It's just if they determine it isn't, then we are left to work with that utility, and then we can come back and say, here's what's going to cost us. Are we willing to approve it at that point?
Right, that's my thought, so that, at least it then comes before the board before we just out and out, like you said, Darrell, just say we're going to compensate. I think authorization to negotiate with them first would be a good first step.
Roger?
Carrie, could you give us an example of non-compensable?
In the letter, it talks about what's compensable and non-compensable, so it gives examples. One non-compensable is one of the water lines that the Cass Rural Water Users has. It's not located on land that they have control or have an easement on. So from this letter, it looks like a vast majority of the utilities identified as necessary for the project in reaches 1 through 7 are compensable.
Kevin?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering if the suggested motion here couldn't just be motion was made to approve a policy to compensate utility owners, public and private, within reaches 1 through 7, the costs associated with. And I think that's leaving out at this time market concerns about in-town levies and those things, so it just apply just to those reaches.
And at that time, we'll probably have, I'm guessing the way we're going to package these utilities, maybe 4 or 5 areas where we send them to the Corps and say, give us your opinion of compensability. And at that time, we could bring those back as package by package to the board and explain the magnitude of the ones that fall in the compensable or non-compensable, and you can make a decision by decision at that time.
And even if, Mr. Mayor, even if they are considered compensable, there still is a negotiation process involved with that, isn't it? We just don't
Right.
automatically.
Yeah. We would be negotiating to make sure that the costs are reasonable, but by core guidelines, we would have to pay the reasonable cost. With the non-compensable, it is a choice.
So by adding the words within reaches 1 through 7 after that, the words private there and then the comma, would that pretty much take care of the concerns of the city with the in-town levies? I would think it would.
It would certainly give us time to work those out.
Mr. Chairman, I would so move that.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, so it's exactly what's before you, except the words within reaches 1 through 7, following the word private. Any other questions or comments, Roger?
Just a comment. We need to make sure that the utility owners understand what we've done here today, and that as we continue down the reaches, this process will continue as we've done today, because there is issues as we go along that have come to our board. Gas Rural Water concerned about their water lines that they feel they might have to replace on their own because the Corps says they're non-compensable. So just make sure we have good dialogue with the utility owners.
Very good. Anything further? Not, we'll take the roll.
Mr. Vania?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Wallaker?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Yes.
Mr. Wimmer?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Ms. Otto?
Yes.
Next item, Red River Basin Commission update. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I see the meeting's been running along smoothly, and so I'll try and do my best to make sure you earn your keep. Couple of things I wanted to do. I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on some of the outreach type activities that we've been doing since our last briefing. And then Zach Herman wanted to give you an update on the funding guidance that draft that we're putting together. That document is not final by any means yet, but we've got some concepts that we've been working on. Since our last meeting, we had our annual conference that second week in January. We had about 450 people attend our conference, and one of the major sessions we had was on our distributed storage work, including this project. That presentation was given by a panel of groups, including Lance, Chad Engel, Jerry Benz, Zach Herman, and Mark Bradshaw, and was very well received, and we got a lot of positive feedback on that. I've also given briefings to the 3 ministers in Manitoba that we work closely with, and as part of my briefings to them in the last 2 weeks, we've talked in great detail about this project and the detailed work that we've provided down here. We did that with the hopes that they would continue this effort in the next reach from Halstead to the Canadian border, and hopefully then convince our partners in Manitoba to do a similar activity on the Manitoba side for the basin. I gave a briefing basically pirating the presentation at our conference to a group in St. Paul called the Society of Military Engineers at Fort Snelling. That was interesting. and was pretty well received. I made a presentation also to the North Dakota Legislative Water Oversight Committee and this chamber on the work we've been doing. And so we've been trying to get the message out about the activities that we've been doing. And as I've done this in different locations, I'm again convinced that we probably have the most detailed modeling type information of any basin in the United States.
Jeff, your presentation to the legislative committee, how many legislators were part of that? You remember?
There was quite a few there.
Was that in Bismarck or?
No, it was here.
Yeah.
It was the oversight committee meeting that they had here in these chambers a week ago. There's probably about 30 members of that committee that were present. Pat gave a presentation as well as a couple of others here. Maury did. About 30? Oh, it's 15 and 16 legislators, okay. One of the other things that we have been doing with the passage of the federal farm bill, we've been working with a group of other organizations, kind of being led by the Retention Authority and Pat Downs, to start working on the Red River Basin being identified as one of the critical conservation areas within that farm bill. We're trying to get federal funding for some of the distributed storage work that we're collectively working on in the basin. Within that farm bill, there's 8 targeted watersheds that will be identified nationwide, and we're competing to see if we can get the red to be identified as one of those 8. And then the other major activity we've been doing is trying to finalize the funding recommendation. We've had several meetings with a committee that we've put together that basically includes Jason, April, Mark, and Bob, as well as Roger Olson and Mark Broadshog. And then the engineering firms that have been working with this on our Halstead Upstream project. We included representatives from the Minnesota DNR, Dan Thule, and Randy Jesvang from the North Dakota State Water Commission, who've been actively involved in reviewing projects and funding on the state level on both sides, and then Pat Downs and Keith Weston, Keith with the NRCS. But that group has basically been the ones that have put together the funding policy guidelines that I wanted Zach to go over with you.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Just a quick agenda, what we're going to run through today. First, I'll just give you just an update on where we're at with the final Halstead Upstream Retention Report. It is still in draft status, but we feel that we're about 99% there. We're just waiting for a few final comments from some of the peer review to be able to finalize that report and close out the actual Halstead Upstream Retention Report. What I'm going to talk about in a little more depth today is just the draft funding policy considerations. You can see the 4 different things we'll talk about there. A performance-based level of funding, what we kind of envision as a 3-phase submittal to get funding for a proposed project. I'll show you maybe how an example project would rank in terms of how many dollars would be allocated to one particular project, and then just a few additional considerations that we're working through before we can finalize the funding policy. So, when we say a performance-based level of funding, really what we're talking about is what you can see illustrated on the slide. If you had a project location anywhere within our Halstead Upstream area, how would that project perform at Fargo and at Halstead? And then use the benefit that's provided from those projects to allocate funding based on truly what you're seeing in terms of flow reductions at those locations. This would all be done with the same modeling capabilities that was done to complete the Halstead Upstream Retention Project. So a couple hydrographs here. What you see here, this is the red line would be basically our existing conditions hydrograph from the Halstead Upstream Retention Study. The green line is the full implementation of the strategy laid out in the Halstead Upstream Retention Study. So that's our 20% flow reduction hydrograph on the Red River at Fargo. Now, through the Fargo Moorhead Diversion Authority funding, what we've kind of discussed and agreed upon was to try and get about 25% of that overall plan in place, or help supplement funding for 25% of implementation of that overall plan, which 25% of that roughly gets you to the black line that you can see there. So basically the area between that black line and the red line is the total volume that would have to be removed, or the water that would have to be retained on the landscape to attain that benefit. Now, rather than focusing on that entire volume, what we've been focusing on in terms of allocating funds is more of a... Hey, Darren? I think your whole laptop died, actually.
Take a look at it. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, we could just follow along.
by
That's-
this.
Okay. We'll get it back up here.
So if you can flip to, let's see here, slide number 4.
There you go.
Oh, you got it back up? Okay. So again, what we've been focusing on is the volume reduction from the hydrograph more relative to when the peak of the flood actually occurs at Fargo and Halstead. So what you see here, the green area, that would represent the volume that would be removed, or the volume that the Diversion Authority would essentially fund removal for. So at Fargo, that green area is about 21,000 acre feet. At Halstead, that same priority area is about 44,000 acre feet. So the way we came up with our performance-based funding was you just take those two volumes, essentially, the 44,000 acre feet at Halstead and the 21,000 acre feet at Fargo, add them together to get 65,000 acre feet. Now, with the Diversion Authority's $24.5 million in funding for retention, you would simply take that dollar amount, divide it by that 65,000 acre feet, and get you approximately about $400 per acre foot removed from that 8-day priority window. So of that volume in the green area, those hydrographs, each acre foot of that green area is worth $400 that a potential project could remove. So, project sponsor steps would be to run the models from the Halstead Upstream Retention Project with their particular project in place, determine what the 8-day volume removal is at Halstead and Fargo, add those volumes together and multiply it by 400, and that would be the total eligible, or the maximum eligible funds for Diversion Authority funding for that particular project. We'll go through an example of this in a second here just to show you how this would work with the real project. So, now in terms of how the actual, how the funds would be allocated, what we've got proposed to date is kind of a 3-phase submittal process. The first phase, really what you're trying to do is you're providing funds for project development to see if you actually have a project that would actually work on the landscape. Basically, a potential applicant would come to you with a concept that they ran through the modeling capabilities, determined an approximate maximum eligible Diversion Authority funding, and then of that dollar amount, 5% of that would be available for project development. When I say project development, that would be things like preliminary design and geotechnical review. Essentially what you would need to determine, will the site actually work for detaining runoff, or is it a feasible location to store runoff? Of that 5% that you would provide, that amount would be non-refundable, meaning if the project were to stall out or die after this phase 1 submittal, the applicant wouldn't be on the hook to provide those funds back to the Diversion Authority. Idea being that's non-refundable because it's to help kind of encourage development of projects in the basin. So, as far as timeline requirements for that first phase, once those funds were awarded from the Diversion Authority, you would essentially, or the potential applicant would have a 2-year time frame to get to the phase 2 submittal. So when we talk about the phase 2 submittal, what we're really trying to answer is, okay, we have this concept that we know is going to work. How are we actually going to implement that? That's things like final design and land acquisition. So at that time, you would then be eligible for up to 90% of the maximum eligible Diversion Authority funding. Again, that's to fund things like final design report, construction plans and specifications, development of operation and maintenance plan, land acquisition, and permitting. Basically, all the steps that you would need to get a project to a point where it's shovel ready or essentially ready to go out and actually build. So once those phase 2 funds were awarded, you would have, or a potential applicant would have, a maximum of 3 years to complete those eligible phase 2 activities before you would move into the phase 3 submittal. And really what the phase 3 submittal is that's once you have your project designed, you're really ready to go out and solicit bids from a contractor, essentially shovel ready. So any remaining eligible funds would then be allocated to the project at that time. And the timeline constraints for that is once those funds are allocated, you'd have to get to a point where you award a construction contract within 1 year of those funds being allocated. So, and phases 2 and 3, any funds allocated during those phases are non-refundable by the Diversion Authority, refundable, meaning that if a project were to stall out and, midway through phase 2, any funds expended of Diversion Authority dollars would then be required to be provided back to you so you could allocate it to another project that would, continue on through project development. So just an example, if a potential applicant came to you guys with a proposed impoundment that had a total storage of about 11,000 acre-feet at that particular site, the first step that applicant would do would be to take that site, run it through the Halstead upstream retention models. In this hypothetical example, at Halstead, you'd see about a 1,500 acre-foot reduction from that 8-day priority window and about a 3,500 acre-foot reduction from that 8-day priority window at Fargo. You would add those two together. That gets you to your 5,000 acre-feet of volume removed from the 8-day window at Halstead and Fargo. That 5,000 acre-feet would then just be multiplied by the $400 per acre-foot rate that you would be funding to get to $2 million of total eligible for Diversion Authority funding. So for phase 1, potentially the applicant could get a maximum of 5% of that total, or $100,000, to help out with project development. Phase 2 would be up to 90% of that $2 million, or $1.8 million. And then phase 3, when you're actually constructing the project, any remaining funds that are still left that are eligible through Diversion Authority could be allocated at that time. And then just a few additional considerations and a couple things that we're still working through. The qualifying applicants, the way we've envisioned it thus far, is it would either be watershed districts, water resource districts, or joint powers entities made up of one or more of those watersheds or water resource districts. Idea being to keep the funds going to local projects that are providing, helping local needs as well. So throughout the entire process, what we've envisioned is, if you choose to fund a project, you wouldn't just be hearing from the project sponsor at those 3 submittal phases. There'd be requirements for quarterly reporting to the Diversion Authority, so you could track things in terms of is progress being actually made on the projects that you're choosing to fund. Basically, there's 3 things I have listed here in terms of things that we're still working through to resolve in terms of coming up with this funding policy. The first question that we've been getting is, how is the storage released? So, we're funding based on removal from that priority area, but how long is that water actually being held to make sure we're not releasing water, or sites that you guys fund aren't releasing water too early and maybe prolonging downstream flooding in other locations. Another thing that's come up recently is the 8-day volume, is that window the right window to use? And those are just some technical considerations that we're working through and comments that we received here recently. So, and then the final thing here is what steps would the Diversion Authority take to actually perform a technical review on the application to make sure all the data was, consistent and things like that for a potential applicant. And where we're at with all this is we're hoping that we can get those few last questions resolved. We think we've got a concept that makes sense for funding retention with the Diversion Authority dollars. Just a few details that we're still working through right now. We're hoping that by your guys' March meeting we'll have kind of a final concept proposal for you guys. So,
Thanks, Zach. The question I have is, sounds reasonable in terms of the formula that you've got. You may have some tweaking to do, as I heard. If you were to take the 96, 97 projects that were identified through the analysis done by the Red River Basin group, and with those projects and your formula here, would there be dollars available with using your formula for all 96, 97 of those projects in a smaller amount, or would there be, depending upon how large, some projects come in, would the first 5 or 10 projects use up the funds?
It would really depend, since we're doing that performance-based evaluation, it would depend on how they actually perform and the relative benefit provided. So you could conceivably have a small, 5, 6 projects that come in and, based on their maximum eligible diversion authority funding, they could eat up to 25 million. Or you could have, a lot of other projects that don't provide quite the same benefit, 20 projects that aren't located quite as ideally in the basin that come in for funding, yeah.
The other thing that we wanted to try and do was we wanted to try and utilize this money to kind of kickstart the process and move them along. And so that's why that 25% figure came in. We basically felt that this money should be used on the first 25% of those 96 projects. So we didn't want to spread it out over the whole implementation period.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep, Kevin?
Yeah, a couple weeks ago, last month when you talked just about this, there was also considerable talk about leveraging dollars, if I remember correctly. So this process, and making some assumptions of whether it's $400 per, cubic storage foot or whatever that may be, that would still have the ability to leverage other dollars depending on what agencies you're going through and working with, correct?
That was another reason, I guess, for the 25%. We felt that, when you look at the 25% of the overall Halstead upstream retention, that allocates funds enough that you're providing a pretty good incentive for a local project sponsor to come to you guys for funding, and it also kind of hits some of those leveraging cost amounts that we were discussing.
We are anticipating that the Farm Bill appropriations will take place this September, so that process hopefully is moving along pretty quickly. The dollar amount that might be available out of that Farm Bill is still up in the air, and we have to be identified as one of the priority areas. But, we're looking at potentially somewhere in that $15 million a year range from the federal Farm Bill, and that comes with a 50-50 match. So we'll still need a contribution from the 2 states, Minnesota and North Dakota. So those, along with the federal money, and hopefully along with some of the local inputs, as well as the Fargo-Moorhead money, we're hoping to work on putting together a package to help move these projects along.
Question, Mr. Chairman. I noticed in the formula you gave consideration to both the benefits at Halstead and the benefits in Fargo. Why were the benefits at Halstead considered? I guess if it's money from this area.
Yeah, I think the discussion in terms of why Halstead was considered was not only that we're going to be providing benefit just to the Fargo-Moorhead area, but also to the kind of the Halstead upstream basin as a whole. And we arrived at Halstead and Fargo versus just Halstead or just Fargo, because then you kind of get a relative scoring, I guess, in terms of benefit provided at each location. So
I think April wanted to jump in.
I think another reason that we looked at that was because the project itself impacts the rivers on the west as well, and getting to Halstead gives you the opportunity to give something back to the Maple River, the Cheyenne River, as well as the ones that are, the Wild Rice and the Red, which are upstream of Fargo.
Mark?
Well, I just want to add that I hope that this is the start of something that could be more of a basin-wide approach. And so I guess that's why we feel it would be appropriate to go up to Halstead. We're hoping that the Water Commission would put up funding for these sorts of projects also. I have a question for Jeff. when we look at the basin, is the basin with respect to the benefit to Fargo is all upstream and or downstream retention? Is that good, or is there a sweet spot for us in the Fargo-Moorhead area? Because as we sense that projects are going to be developed based on their benefit to the local area. But are there specific areas that would be more beneficial than others?
Well, from Fargo's standpoint, yeah, there would be areas, within that Halstead upstream retention area that would be more benefit, meaning they would, for a total acre foot at the site, they would remove a higher percentage of acre foot from that 8-day window at Fargo, so if a spot's, if a storage site's placed in a sweet spot that provides 10,000 acre feet, it might take a significant portion out of that green area on the hydrograph versus if it's in not the sweet spot, it may not take quite as much off of the green portion of the hydrograph.
And I guess my question would be is, would we want to incent those by offering $500 or $600?
Some of that prioritization and identification of those types of sweet spots will come out in the formula. Because if you're putting a retention area, say farther up in the watershed, its impact on that 8-day window is going to be a lot less. And so if you're looking at a project that's closer to Fargo, that isn't in an area that already has a lot of storage in it, that project will provide a lot more storage for this window that we're looking at and receive more money from the Fargo-Moorhead portion of the funding package that's put together.
Go ahead, April.
I would like to point out that we did identify a potential gap, if you will, as well as we were going through this, which you've highlighted at the end of your presentation that this board should be aware of. There is going to be a need to review the models, and so again, for consistency, to try to make sure that we're treating everybody the same. And the discussion was, does the administration of that service, providing the model analysis, come from the $25 million, or does this board set aside another set of funding to facilitate the review of the modeling so that we're keeping things consistent? We still think that we could potentially use the Red River Retention Authority or one of those groups to provide that service, so that, again, to provide quality control and to keep consistency going on, but they don't have any funding internally to dedicate towards the review of the models. So that was something that did come up in our discussions.
Good point. Certainly a good, it gives us a good idea of where you're heading with this. If you've got further tweaking, great. I really think it boils down to what is the first project that is going to be ready or come to us from any watershed district or water board to say, hey, we're going to pursue this. And I think at that time, then we will have to weigh in on finalizing these things. We can take this as kind of a guide right now, but I think then at some point, that first project, I think, is going to force us to accept a particular formula, the one you've got, or finer tuning, or what have you. So I think it's good concept right now, but that first project will force us to lock into something. Roger.
Did you want that? Did you want plans for that project tomorrow on your desk?
Yeah,
Maple River does have a project that's that will be going to construction this summer. That certainly will be coming before this authority to ask for funds. So yeah, there is other projects, other retention projects that are out there that are just kind of on idle, just to see how this process goes, and there's some good ones.
Yeah,
I think you are going to see other applicants emerging once this becomes finalized, especially in that phase one project concept where they can really do the preliminary design and figure out if their concept's actually going to work. So you are going to see things come forward from local applicants. So.
But with the Farm Bill, with this money, and, hopefully the continued interest both in the state of Minnesota and especially the state of North Dakota, I think there's a real need for us as organizations that are trying to work on distributed storage to get that word out, to get the projects lined up, and especially start working with landowners to find some willing landowners that'll work with us.
Mm-hmm. Jerry, how many do you have lined up?
Lined up? That's a dangerous assumption. We are looking at some, I'll say that.
Mark, did you have something else?
Yeah, one of the questions that was asked of the technical committee is, to what level does this group want to get down into the details and the weeds of, or do you just want us to have an engineer or the applicant to have an engineer certify that, and like April was saying, certify that it meets all your guidelines and you're just going to provide the funds? Do you want to get into the details?
Well, I don't want to, on every project, no. I think once we establish that we have an idea with the modeling and the formula, then I think that others can, go through that process and bring something to us saying that based upon.
And did we want to do any special monitoring to see if we were getting any benefit?
Certainly.
Those are the things that we talked about.
Yeah. I think we have to at that point. And I don't think we can just move ahead and not worry about whether or not we've realized benefits. We will have to do that. And I think April's point is a good one. How do we want to go about that?
One more comment. When you look at the benefit, from these projects, you look at that benefit and what you're buying, the money you're investing in that portion of the 8-day window, you're really getting a good buy. If you consider if you were going to go out and build this whole project on your own, you would have to pay for all of the acre feet of water, not just the part that strictly benefits you. So for $400 an acre foot, for that benefit, we are getting a great bang for our buck.
The rule of thumb that we look at is about $2,000 an acre foot for a typical project cost, just for kind of a comparative purpose.
Okay. Anything further?
Before you move on to your next topic, I see Mr. Stensvold is by the door, and I believe there's a set of car keys that has been found if anybody's missing them.
Not mine.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff and Zach.
Mercedes? Must be yours.
What kind of car, Kevin, now?
Moving on, public outreach, Roger.
I'll make this short. There's a full sheet of activities. Read it at your leisure.
Roger, we saw comments from Wimmer, but did you make some comments at that meeting, Comstock?
Oh, yeah, I could talk briefly about that. Brad and I went to the Upstream Coalition meeting where they presented their alternative plan for the project. And both Brad and I sat in the back. I thought I sat there without any expression on my face, but FM Dam comments were otherwise, said that I was frustrated by the lack of control of the information that was being provided. But anyway, yes, we were there, and it was a very emotional meeting. It was, if you've never been to a meeting with this group that is being impacted by our project, you need to go. And just sit there and listen. You just need to do that. And be prepared to answer some questions because they'll come forward. They'll come and ask you questions. Brad got asked by one of the media, got asked some questions, but just be willing to take some heat, be willing to listen, and yeah, it's just it's an interesting process, and if you haven't been there, you should.
Question is, was there dialogue, or was it just their side did not really, you guys really didn't get to answer anything
No,
legitimately?
we were just there as an open public. We weren't there to present anything.
Yeah, and we could have. It would have been rather foolish to get up and do that. My question to either technical team or to the Corps, was there an official response? I know we bantered a little bit, but was there an official response to some of the solutions that they provided that night?
The only official response that we've had was when Brigadier General DeLuca was here, and that was an open public forum. The media was present and invited to be there. And then here today, that's all we feel is necessary that we need to do. Our plan is our plan, our alignment is our alignment, and we studied it and dismissed it.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think, to add to that, we have studied that particular option previously, so it's documented in the report.
Very good. Nothing further on that. Tom, do you have any?
I don't have anything to report. Our initial intention was to have a meeting of our task force after the first of the year, and we're working on an agenda. We haven't had that meeting yet, but I would hope that in the next month we'll get our group together again.
Okay, very good.
Isn't it true when they had the mayor's discussion that still number one issue in the community is flood protection? Isn't that what came out of that discussion? I think business leaders were there.
Yep, it sure did.
They had 5 different options you could choose, and number one was flood protection, about 63 to 65%, as I recall.
That's right.
Okay. Moving down, land management, Mayor.
Mr. Bradshaw will give he said, a short report on the land acquisition summary.
While he's doing that, Dirk is going to hand out, I know a number of the board members have been involved in the Finance Committee or Land Management Committee with regard to some of the land acquisitions, and so you're getting a hard copy of that. Okay.
Okay, should have been distributed before our land management summary that we've been looking at each meeting, the last few meetings. While Dirk's handing it out, I'll maybe point out a few things on that. It shows acquisitions in process. At the top of the sheet are ones that are close to closing, and as you move down the sheet, we're probably not as far along in the process. Wanted to point out that most of them on the list are being acquired. The North Dakota acquisitions are being acquired by the Cass County Joint Water Resource District before they get deeded to the Diversion Authority. Medical hardship properties are being acquired directly into the name of the Diversion Authority. So, for example, the second property on this list is 346 Schnell Drive out at Oxbow. That's a medical hardship property, and you see it says by DA, so that's kind of a different process than what the joint board acquisitions are. Was this distributed? Does everybody have this?
No.
No, not that one.
No? Okay, I apologize. Okay. Well, you'll be seeing that at most meetings, but what Dirk handed out is current farmland acquisitions that we presented to the Finance Committee yesterday and was presented to the Cass County Joint Board for action this morning. You should have 2 maps and a spreadsheet that has a ID number on the left-hand side that corresponds to boxes on the map to kind of identify what we're talking about for farmland acquisitions. We had a piece of property came up for sale in December on a public auction, and it's where the Wild Rice River structure will be, so it was decided that that was an important piece of property and that we should try to buy it. Cass County Joint Board had somebody at the auction. We were able to buy the property, and within hours of our purchase of the sale, the grapevine got around the country that we were looking at farmland. And so people who knew that their farmland was going to be impacted by the project decided that, you know what, maybe it's time to deal with that. I can know where I'm at. I can sell my property to the Diversion Authority if they're willing to buy it and know where I'm at. So we have been approached by numerous people since we bought the first property, and we've kind of sorted out and tried to prioritize things, and we've been acquiring farmland. Most of our acquisitions have been north of the Maple River in reaches 4 and 5 of the project. The parcels in blue are properties that we have already purchased. We have purchase orders. Most of them we've closed on already. There's a significant piece that'll be closing next week. The parcels in the yellow boxes on the one map identified as parcels 3, 5, 7, and 10, and on the other map identified as numbers 11 and 12. Both the Finance Committee and the Cass County Joint Board voted to move ahead with acquiring those parcels. So I don't know, Daryl, if your intent is to have a motion, or is this for information today?
Well, the Finance Committee basically votes to recommend to this board, and I think it's imperative that the board acknowledge support of moving ahead here, and we meet only the day before this board, so I think things are close enough to what our recommendation was, so that it gives Mark formal authority from not only the Finance Committee but this authority board to continue to move on closing on these. So, and what he's dealing with is everything that you see on that first page, with the exception of 13 and 14, which he explained we're not pursuing. So I would entertain a motion from this board to approve that.
And I'll make that motion, and that's for the, I believe, Daryl, the figure of $4,966,000.
Yes.
And if I could clarify, sorry to interrupt before you have a second, but the numbers in the recommended column are at various points of negotiation. So if some of those may not get to completion, but that'll give us the authority to move to the next step, and if we can acquire it for those numbers, we will. And if something happens, we'll have to come back for further authorization.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? If not, we'll take the roll.
Mr. Vania?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Thorstad?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Wallaker?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Yes.
Mr. Wimmer?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Ms. Otto?
Yes.
Okay, and otherwise, we have appraisers beginning to work in Oxbow, Hicks, and Baki. I apologize. That was my message at the last time you met, and we had some hiccups in final contract negotiations. So here I am again saying next week we're going to start with appraisals in Oxbow, Hicks, and Baki, but I'm much more confident now that that's really going to happen.
Mayor?
Thank you.
Thank you. The Land Management Committee made a recommendation and voted on it to recommend to the authority the approval of Pfeiffer's Land Management to provide farmland management services for acquired farmland until the deposition of the property is required for implementation of the diversion project. They had a selection meeting. They interviewed a few firms and so forth, and it's their recommendation that this move forward. So we're moving this forward to the Diversion Authority for a motion to approve Pfeiffer's as the selection of their land management group.
Mr. Chairman, I would so move the recommendation.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
That takes care of it.
Okay, thank you. Finance.
Good afternoon. The Finance Committee met yesterday, and we discussed quite at length the special assessment process that we've been going through and studying over the last year or so. I think it was received very well by the Finance Committee. It really kind of lays out what people could expect to pay in specials on this project, or expect to vote on specials for this project. Hopefully, all the specials will be paid by a sales tax. We kind of defined what would be the direct benefits and what would be the indirect benefits, and how those benefits would be spread among the different taxing entities. The upshot of it yesterday was, I think the Finance Committee liked what they saw. They would like the Joint Water Resource Board to go out and meet with the affected entities, the cities, the townships, and see if we can fine tune it, see if there's some suggestions out there that we may need to do some changes on that. I think that's coming along very well. The other thing that we talked about, as Mark said, was the land purchases. And right now on the Oxbow purchases and on the Oxbow big land purchase and on the farmland purchases, we have not been getting reimbursement from the state of North Dakota. We need to do some work on the Oxbow one. The farmland one will have to wait for a while. Which brings up, cash flow. So far, we're paying cash for everything. We're financing things with our local sales tax dollars as we go along. So we also talked about short-term financing. We're going to explore with PFM selling some short-term type debt in order to keep going for the rest of the year. One of the questions that comes up that we'll have to explore with Erica is who issues the debt? Is it the county, the city, or is it the Diversion Authority? And of course, right now the backing for the debt would be sales tax. So, a couple other notes. There was an auction last Friday. The Diversion Authority does own a farmstead in Minnesota, and those buildings were sold last week. That consisted of a house, Quonset hut, a garage, and another shed, I think. Got some pretty favorable bids. We got $9,600. It's not a lot when you consider what we paid for it, but to sell those buildings and get them off the site so we don't have to demolish them is a good deal. So the next step on that would be getting flowage easements on the land and selling the land. In your packet, starting on item 9, are the financial reports. So far, we've spent about $39 million on this project, or I guess 39.8. That's pretty close to 40. $3.3 million so far this year. The next page, you'll see the budget amount. We've got a $70 million budget. For this month, we spent $3.3 million. Fiscal year to date, $15 million. So we're doing good that way. And like I say, right now we're paying cash for everything. But at some point, when we start buying homes in Oxbow, that's no longer going to be possible. So, any questions?
Any questions for Mike? Mike, on this, unless I'm overlooking it, but next item here, voucher approval, I don't see the list of vouchers in this staple.
No, I think she forgot to include those.
Maybe you want to cover that. verbally so we can approve that?
Let me grab that in my.
Okay.
It's not this 39 million?
No, it's quite a bit less. A couple $100,000, if I recall.
Most of our contracts are paid automatically in that they're on work orders. The ones we have listed on our finance, that the Finance Committee looked at was Cass County Joint Water Resource District. That was $221,756, and that's a lot of the right of entry work and then the work with the Special Assessment Committee. The other two are Eric Johnson Associates, Bond Counsel Services, $1,739.95, and General Legal Matters, $4,760.85, for a total of $228,256.80.
So we need approval on that.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second.
So when you say a couple of thousand, that's 200,000?
No, I said a couple $100,000. No, I was accurate. We'll take the roll.
Mr. Vaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Thorstad?
Yep.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Wallaker?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Yes.
Mr. Wimmer?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Ms. Otto? Yes.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
I had one question for Mike. On page one of the checks, page one here, and 1, 2, 3, the fourth one from the bottom, it says Google loving the oven. And I Googled that, and I got a really good banana bread recipe. And so I was just wondering if I got to the wrong website or what that is. Don't know?
I think it's for some rolls and that sort of thing.
Okay.
He's just kind of wondering if he can get the same deal there.
Any other business?
Valentine's Day?
Next meeting is March 13th. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.